On today's Locked On Jayhawks, the three biggest takeaways from KU's loss to UNLV.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. You can tune into the show. It's called Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Thank you to the everydayers tuning in to each and every episode. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. We're getting into our three biggest takeaways from the Kansas loss to UNLV. We're going to get a little bit into Jaylen Daniels, what is going on there with the passing game, a little bit about some a possible breakout star on the defensive end of the football, and plenty more. Plus, we'll get into our top and bottom performers according to Pro Football Focus and what that can kind of tell us from that said KU UNLV game. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Again, Locked On CFB. Okay, so three biggest takeaways. Let's start with takeaway number one from KU's 3-point loss to UNLV. Well, number one is that turns out the Illinois game was not an aberration. Turns out the Illinois game was not an exception to the rule. And realistically, I could probably say that about the entirety of what things meant as far as the game goes. But I want to specifically focus on the passing offense. I guess if you want to rephrase this as my takeaway number one is that the passing offense has questions and real problems, because as problematic as it was in the Illinois game, right? You average basically under 5 yards per pass attempt. You averaged more rush yards per attempt than you did pass yards per attempt. You threw 3 interceptions. The passing game was not good against Illinois. At least it was okay, but it's a small sample size. It's one game. If you bounce back the next game or early in the season, you'll be able to look back at that game and just say, oh, it was just the exception to the rule. Now that it has happened back-to-back games and the turnovers, I guess, went down, so that's good. And I mean, overall, the first half was probably better. Like, you saw flashes, at least in the first half, that were better than maybe more of what you saw in the Illinois game as a whole. But still, the fact that the second half felt worse than anything you saw in the Illinois game. So in a certain sense, it feels like it's trending down, which is unfortunate. I posted this on Twitter earlier this weekend. There's a stat. It's called air yards per attempt. So yards per attempt is just a simple, if I threw for 100 yards on 10 throws, right? I went 7 of 10 throwing for 100 yards. That would be 10 yards per attempt, right? The amount of yards you get per attempt. The air yards per attempt is a measurement of how basically far you're throwing the football downfield. And so in theory, like if you throw the ball at the line of scrimmage on a receiver's screen, the air yards per that attempt are going to be 0, right? If you throw the ball 20 yards downfield, it's a deep out, or it's a deep drag route, or I don't know, it's a quick little fade route downfield, whatever. 20 yards downfield, and then you have a 0-yard pass, your average air yards then becomes basically, 10 yards. And so it's not that air yards per attempt is like this stat that necessarily indicates, hey, the quarterbacks who have the best air yards per attempt, the quarterbacks who have the worst air yards per attempt are always the best and worst quarterbacks. No, that's not the case. Like, there is scheme stuff. And, if you look at like Air Force quarterbacks, like they might average more air yards per, I don't actually know this for a fact, but like, I don't know, more air yards per attempt because they run the ball so much. And then when they do throw, they're going to throw downfield, like, because the defense is creeping up or something. There's ways to be effective at both. But point being, you do want your air yards per attempt to not be like super low. You do want it to be a situation where, you are attempting throws downfield, because if you are attempting throws downfield consistently, it's stressing the defense in different ways, but also it's probably indicative that you're getting throws downfield in the intermediate to deep quadrants of the field to where you are able to have success. And so you look back at past KU quarterbacks like Jason Bean last year, he was 10.9 air yards per attempt. Jason Bean the year before, 10.2. You look at Jaylen Daniels last year, 10.1. Jaylen Daniels the year before, 9.5. And I did this list of quarterbacks back to KU back to 2016. You even have guys like Ryan Willis, his air yards per attempt was 4.8. You have Montel Cozart in 2016, it was 4.2. Miles Kendrick in 2020 was 4.5. Jaylen Daniels is a 17-year-old true freshman behind a cardboard box offensive line, was 3.7. This season, Jaylen Daniels is 3.3 air yards per attempt. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that KU was not throwing the ball very much downfield. I think what makes that crazier, though, you think of the Illinois game. You think of the Illinois game, and it was like too many attempts downfield, too many deep balls. It was either receiver screen or it was an attempt downfield. And so if you even consider the fact that, yeah, they had those deep balls in the Illinois game, that this number is that low, what does that tell you about the rest of the passes, right? If you took out those deep ball attempts against Illinois and I guess Lindenwood, then what is this number? Is it like 2.5? Is it like 2? Like that is just insane. So it was the lowest number of any quarterback since at least 2016. I didn't go back any further than that. Ran out of characters on the tweet. But this tells us that they're probably running too many screens, which I think is probably something a lot of people would assume. This tells us that they're not attacking the intermediate and the deep portions well enough. And this probably also tells us that Jaylen Daniels is like some of it could be the play calling. Some of it could also be Jaylen Daniels maybe isn't as confident to throw the football downfield and he's taking the checkdowns and not wanting to risk it downfield because when he is, he's getting intercepted. So like there's a lot that kind of goes into that number, but the bottom line is that is a bad place to be in. Overall, you look at KU's yards per pass attempt, going to that more traditional number. KU's at 6.4 this year. They were 10 a season ago, 10.0. Year before that, they were 8.9. Year before that, they were 7.0 in 2021. Currently, 6.4 yards per attempt passing, which Kansas is at this season. That's dead last in the Big 12. The distance between Kansas in last place versus Arizona State, who's in 11th place of the Big 12 teams in throwing yards per attempt, it's the same gap between Kansas to 11th place as 11th place Arizona State all the way to the best number in the conference, which is currently owned by UCF. So that's how big the gap is there of how poor Kansas passing offense has been. So that's obviously parts of it. There's more parts to passing offense. What about interceptions? Well, we know there have been interception issues for KU. If we go by interceptions thrown about quarterbacks who have thrown passes this year in college football, Jaylen Daniels is 308th in the country in interceptions thrown. Now, I don't know how many of those would qualify, how many have thrown one pass or whatever, because backups play early in this year. Put it this way, though. Only one guy nationally has thrown more interceptions than what Jalon Daniels has thrown. That's not a good place to be in either. Okay, what about if we go to like a stat like QBR, which is kind of this all-encompassing metric? Well, Jaylen Daniels is 13th among 16 in the league for the Big 12. He is 85th in the country. And you look at previous years, he's been like in the top 25. DJ Uiagalelei has really struggled at Florida State and drawn a lot of ire. Jaylen Daniels right now is only 1.6 points better on total QBR than DJU. So I guess if you want to get into the good news, Jaylen Daniels' best game by QBR was actually still this last game because of the first half he played. The second half, I would imagine if you divvied it out in halves, was maybe the worst. But if he can figure out how to rekindle old Jaylen, or maybe old Jaylen's gone, I don't know. Maybe this week is a good opportunity to be in. I don't know how much of this stuff is mental. If it is, you think back to the New Era game that Jaylen Daniels was a part of, played so well and shouts that, starts the video, everything like that. You think about that game. That was in Morgantown. That was at West Virginia. Maybe there are some good vibes to be had. Jaylen Daniels going to Morgantown this week, feeling that same sort of feeling being in that stadium. I don't know. Maybe that is something that can lead to a positive boost and can make him better in league play. But obviously, now that it's happened back-to-back weeks, now that it's happened 2 straight times, and again, it looked even worse the second half of the UNLV game than anything we saw in the previous 6 quarters, which still had some struggles. This is kind of becoming more of a needing to change or fix than needing to just stay course. And that is what is scary here as you try to figure this stuff out. So the hope is that it turns around. The hope is that we get old Jaylen. Again, I feel bad at what's going on for him. And obviously it's unfortunate for everybody around the program. But yeah, the passing offense has not been good enough so far. And can they figure out will be the big question the rest of the season, especially since pretty much all the other aspects, all the other areas have looked pretty good for KU so far this season. I was looking at some of the Pro Football Focus numbers as we were getting ready for the third segment of today's show. And you can take a look on Pro Football Focus at like a schedule view, and it shows you the team grades in each category. And so they have them like color coded to make it easier. Like if it's If it's like a really good grade, like an 80 or a 90, it's like a blue or like a dark green, teal, I guess you would say. If it's in like the 70s, it's like a green. And the higher 70 it gets, it becomes like a darker green, getting to that more like blue hue. If you get into like the 50s and 60s, it starts to become like a yellow hue. And then you start getting into like the 40s, it starts to become like an orange hue, and stuff below that kind of becomes a red hue. Point being, there are only two orange hues, two orange blocks on these Pro Football Focus grades for any year. So there's passing grade, there's pass block grade, receiving, running, run defense, tackling, pass rush. There's a bunch of others that I didn't even get to. There are only two orange blocks among all these different categories among 3 games for KU in this grid. Both of them are the passing grades for KU. It's against Illinois and UNLV. So can you figure that out? But the takeaway right now, based on the last 2 games and this last game backing up what happened the game before, is that the passing offense is kind of in some trouble right now. All right, let's continue on with our second and third takeaways from the game. This is Locked On Jayhawks. We are brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. I was at a wedding this weekend, up late. Then I'm getting up early the next morning with the baby waking up early. Needed an energy boost, which boom, 5 Hour Energy. 5 Hour Energy is the brand hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them that alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy and hectic day. You always know where to find 5 Hour Energy shots. They're right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. You can stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5 Hour Energy shots. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Continuing on with our 3 biggest takeaways. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Don't forget to make Locked On College Football your second listen. Okay, takeaway number 2. This is more of a positive one. Tommy Dunn is an all Big 12 level defensive tackle. He is making that jump into being that type of player. You know, we talked about this in the offseason that we were higher on that interior of the defensive tackle unit than you might think on paper. And we figured, okay, there's going to be a good rotation of guys. Can somebody take that jump to being the next guy? And I think the favorite for it through the offseason was maybe a guy like DJ Withers, maybe even through Caleb Taylor's name around. And Tommy Dunn has kind of taken that mantle, I think, so far. He was a game wrecker against UNLV. He had an awesome game for KU for really much of the game. Really played well working with the linebackers. Like there were a lot of run plays that got plugged up, whereas like Tommy Dunn and Cornell Wheeler, Tommy Dunn and JB Brown kind of combining on this hit. So overall through 3 games, obviously as a defensive tackle, interior guy, you're not going to rack up like huge stats. Like a lot of times your job is to take up a blocker or 2 to open up the hole for the linebacker to make the tackle, for this other guy to make the tackle. So you're never going to be somebody who gets, 50 tackles in a season. At least you wouldn't think so unless you're pretty darn special. But 9 tackles through 3 games, so about 3 per game, which is all things considered pretty good. 2 TFLs and half a sack so far. So if you extrapolate that over the course of a 12-game season for KU, then you're looking at 36 tackles. You're looking at 8 tackles for loss, and you're looking at 2 sacks. That would be really good defensive tackle numbers. Like by comparison, Daniel Wise, his sophomore season, which I think he was still all Big 12, because that would have been 2016 when I think Dorrance Armstrong had a big year. I don't remember. 38 tackles, 10 TFLs, 3 sacks. And that's when he was playing many more snaps than Tommy Dunn is, who was rotating out with other guys. So I think that's kind of what you're looking at here, that he's taking that step up. Some of it's statistics, some of it is not. He already has more sacks. He already has only 4 less tackles than he made last season, so taking that step up. He has a 73 Pro Football Focus grade, including a 70 in terms of pass rush and what he's been able to provide there. And he's already up to 98 snaps on the season, so he's playing a lot more than in years past. So 33 snaps per game. That was 42 snaps on Friday night, which that is where the real increase is coming. And last season, he averaged 22 snaps per game. So clearly, the coaching staff is giving him more trust. He's earned it because the playing has been really good. And I think what's even crazier, like according to Pro Football Focus, he's missed 4 tackles so far this season. which is one of the higher numbers on the team. He only has a 29 tackling grade on Pro Football Focus. Now, I do think some of those for defensive linemen, for defense tackles specifically, can be overblown on the tackling grade on PFF, because a lot of them is, oh, I'm getting blocked by this guy, but I really opened up the lane for somebody else to make tackle, and now I'm going to stick my arm out there and try to grab the running back, and I missed the tackle, I guess. So I don't know if you get dinged for that much, but you can view that as a positive, because overall Tommy Dunn's had a good season and has a good PFF grade even despite that, and say, okay, if he just starts, making, let's say he made one extra of those tackles, two extras of those tackles, right now, all of a sudden you're taking an even bigger leap on plays that seem to be kind of doable. So I've been really impressed with Tommy Dunn, and I definitely feel like he is kind of making that leap to being a possible, all Big 12 honorable mention, all Big 12 second team. We'll see if he can make an even bigger jump and be that kind of superstar defensive tackle for KU. Third and final takeaway here, Kansas is not a good turnover or disciplined team. This was something where Kansas wasn't a great turnover team last year. They were a bad team at avoiding penalties. And that kind of goes back to 2022 as well. Now, 2021, the first year of the Leipold era, they did a great job at avoiding penalties. But this year, too, like early on, there haven't been great returns for KU. They had 9 penalties for 90 yards in the loss to UNLV. So you look at the 2 games they played against UNLV, the one bowl game, the one this year, that's basically 300 yards of penalty yards in 2 games. Currently, Kansas ranks 76th in the country in penalty yards per game. Last season, Kansas was 13th of 14 teams in the Big 12 in penalty yards per game. So you're doing a bad job of avoiding these penalties. Then right now, Kansas is negative in turnovers. You are -5 over the last 2 games, and you are -4 on the season with those turnovers. So last year, Kansas was right around even, which, I mean, if at this point you said Kansas can finish even this year, that would mean you'd be +4 over the final 9 games. I would take that for sure. The problem here is that, if you're giving away turnovers like they're lollipops on interceptions, it's going to be hard to kind of keep that even at the other end. But Kansas hasn't really been forcing turnovers, and really the best chance they had to get one against UNLV, they couldn't jump on the football. And the thing is, like, you hear the term fumble luck all the time, and I talk about it too, because like typically teams recover about 50% of the fumbles that are out there. Are there ways you could maybe consistently be, 55, 60% as a program if you work on certain things, or, if you typically have good athletes or around the football, have a lot of good team tackling? Yeah, those numbers are probably going to go up because you're going to have more guys around there. But KU had plenty of guys around the football against UNLV and just could not pick up the football. And yes, dive on the football, that would be great. But like, I think there were 3 or 4 attempts to pick up the football for KU, and all but one of them were guys trying to dive on the football, and it still didn't work. So, like, there is a little bit of bad luck. But the problem is, you go back to last year, Kansas was one of the top 2 teams in the conference in forcing fumbles, but they were in the bottom half of the league in recovering fumbles. So that has kind of carried over. And so when you look at it, if you're going to be, not disciplined from the standpoint of getting a lot of penalties, and you're going to be bad in the turnover game, that makes it tough to overcome. And it's one thing if you're Georgia and you're doing that thing where you just are like overwhelmingly talented than the other team. Kansas has a lot of talent on the roster. A lot of games, like I think all these games so far this season, they've been the more talented team. But the margin of how much more talented they've been or are, I think we're seeing right now, they've lost these close games. It's not a huge amount. And so if you're Kansas, you still do have to play fundamentally solid football. And we're not seeing that right now. And my worry is that based on some of the numbers last year, in addition to what we've seen earlier this year, that those are just going to be problems all season long for KU. All right, let's finish up. Top PFF performers, bottom PFF performers for KU against UNLV. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, where you'll be able to probably get boosts for a bunch of the games coming up this weekend with FanDuel, or maybe some Monday Night Football action tonight. Well, with America's #1 sportsbook, we have something a little bit different for you as well. Now through September 22nd, so got a little less than a week, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. That's FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode of the show with our top and bottom PFF performers for the KU UNLV game. We're going to get into a first quarter report on Tuesday's episode where stocks up, stocks down. Plan on having some more shows later throughout the week. Maybe we'll have a conversation about the quarterback specifically and get into a preview as well for the West Virginia game, maybe some basketball content too. All right, so the top PFF performers on the offensive side of the football, Bryce Foster had a 79.7 grade. So we talked about I don't even know what to think about this, man, because we talked about this earlier this week that Bryce Foster needed to have a big game for KU to win the game. Bryce Foster had the best game for the KU offense, and they lost the game. And we kind of said this as part of that, like, this is not saying that if Bryce Foster has a good game, they're guaranteed to win the game. It's that if Bryce Foster has a good game, it severely increases their chances and, would be in a position of need to avoid losing the game. And I think in a real way, it contributed to a lot of winning. Again, there's only so much you can do, though. If your quarterback is going 1 for 10 during a stretch in the second half and has 2 interceptions, one that leads to a possible 10-point swing at the end of the first half, then and your offensive coordinator is not, finding things in tune, right? I mean, the center, the left tackle, the Devin Neal, they could have all had the best games in the world, and it probably still wouldn't have mattered. So, but nonetheless, that was good to see. Bryce Foster has been good so far. Trevor Cardell, I thought he played a good game. 76 PFF grade. He had a couple nice catches. One was a bit of a high throw that he was open for, made a good catch. The other one, he was getting kind of hit from behind and held onto it. Michael Ford, 68 grade. Devin Neal, a 67. And then Lawrence Arnold was a 67 as far as the top 5 there. But not nearly as many highly rated offensive guys. On the bottom 5 for the offensive side of the football, Jaylen Daniels was the bottom number at a 44.6. I don't know that would be surprising. The second to last was Bryce Cabledew at a 45. And I think in general, the tackles struggled a bit in this game. I thought Logan Brown probably had a better first half, but Logan Brown was penalized twice. Bryce Cabledew was penalized once. So you get 3 penalties from your 2 tackles. Brown wasn't in the bottom 5, but Cabledew was. That certainly didn't help with Jaylen Daniels either. I do think once they became more predictable in the second half with what they were doing, you probably as defensive ends start kind of pinning your ears back and getting excited because you're going, they're going to run it on first down, and then here comes the pass, whatever. Leighton Cure was bottom 5. He only had 3 snaps, though. Quentin Skinner was bottom 5 at 49.5. And then you had Tavita Noah, who's in for just 5 snaps in the bottom 5 as well. Only really other things of note, of interest, was kind of the snap counts here. Like Savion Morrison had 10 snaps, but just felt like they were like, we're not really going to get him the football. Doug Emelian, Torrey Loughlin, only 1 and 3 snap. Trevor Wilson, who I thought was going to have a bigger role in this team, only 5 snaps in the game for KU. What about on the defensive side of the football for the Jayhawks? Top PFF performers, Mello Dotson, 77.3. Mello Dotson has been KU's best corner so far this season. Not that Kobe Bryant's been bad. Kobe Bryant's been fine. I do think there were a couple times that, maybe he got beat on the outside in this game, the UNLV, and they just didn't come through with the completion. And we'll get to the bottom 5 PFF performers. He was actually on there. I don't think he was necessarily that bad, but it's less about Kobe. It's more about, I think Mello has just raised to another level. He's been really good so far this season for KU. Taiwan Berryhill, 73 PFF grade. That was good to see. Berryhill's had some struggles in the past. Played 30 snaps, rotated in. He was good in this game. More power to him. He ended up with an 80 tackling grade. He had a 73 overall grade. Jeremy Robinson, good grade for him too, 73 overall grade. And if he would have just came up with that one, he had 1 missed tackle in the game, and it was that one unfortunate play at the end, he would have had pretty stellarly perfect game you could have asked for in what he did. But overall, he was good. J.B. Brown up there at a 72. And then how about this one? Blake Harreld, again, kind of rotating in, the young redshirt freshman. Only 11 snaps, but a 71 PFF grade. I also will mention this guy right on the outskirts, Alex Reich, the kind of hawk who played more in this game, 17 snaps, because Jason Gilliam going through an injury. And Reich was 6th on PFF grade at a 69 there. And overall, KU had, 12 players who were graded a 65 or higher. That's good stuff because a 65 is basically, average. Like even 60 is kind of average, but 65 is like dead average. So to even have 12 and then have 5 guys who are 70 or above, which is like a good grade, speaks well to what the defense kind of did overall. But on the bottom 5, you have DJ Warner, only 5 snaps, 43 PFF grade. Kobe Bryant was there at a 49 PFF grade. Devin Dye at a 50, DJ Withers at a 57, and then Ron McGee in just 6 snaps had a 59 for KU. They overall missed 12 tackles, which is more than they missed in the first 2 games combined. So certainly some skill position speed hurt KU a little bit more in this game. But honestly, a majority of those missed tackles, it felt like was on the quarterback, who was a big power runner and had more speed than I thought he did, but still, wasn't as fast as like Jacob DeJesus or something like that. So some interesting numbers there, to say the least. We'll see how that impacts, who's getting playing time as the season goes on this week and moving forward for KU. That'll do it for this episode of the show. You can find our show, Locked on Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time with LOJ.